Like and subscribe. Mars, the Red Planet Rescue. Joe Rocker stared at the blinking distress signal. It was the Mars terraforming colony. His rescue team was the best, but this mission was different. The clock was ticking, and a massive storm was about to hit the colony. Joe's team, suited up in advanced exoskeleton suits, checked their equipment. They were ready for anything, or so they thought. "Landing in 3 minutes, announced the pilot. Joe glanced at his team. "Remember, we have 10 minutes to get in, find the survivors, and get out. The storm won't wait." The ship touched down with a jolt. The ramp lowered, revealing the red, rocky landscape of Mars. The colony's buildings just ahead, partially covered in a red frost. Joe Rocker led the charge, his team fanning out in formation. Reaching the habitat, Joe slammed his fist on the door control. It didn't budge. "Override it now," he ordered. One of his team members, a tech specialist, hacked into the system, and the door slid open. Inside, they found the survivors huddled in the center of the room. "We're here to get you out," Joe said. "Stay close and follow our lead." Dr. Carter stepped up. "Sir, the whole terraforming facility is lost. It seems we awakened an ancient parasite that lay dormant in the polar ice. We also discovered an ancient alien artifact buried in the ice. It looks to be a time capsule from an alien race." Joe cut her off. "We don't have time for this. We're on the clock. Gather your things, and we need to move. Now." A loud, buckling sound echoed through the habitat, shaking it violently. The hissing noise of leaking air erupted. "Sir, we're bleeding O2!" one of the crew shouted. "We need to move, and now!" Joe Rocker shouted, "Okay, men, we are on a timer here. Bring the biosuits over. Get these civilians suited up and ready for departure." Dr. Carter stepped forward, her face desperate. "Sir, there's another person that's not here. We need to go get them." Joe shook his head. "We don't have time. If they're not here, then they're on their own. We cannot risk the lives of everyone to take our exit window to the limit. It's not just a random employee, sir. It's my child, Tommy. He's 9. He's trapped on the top floor of the building. We were trying to rescue him as you entered," Dr. Carter explained. Joe's face hardened. "How old?" she repeated. 9, sir." Joe turned to his lieutenant. "Lieutenant, get these people suited up and ready to go. If I'm not back in 4 minutes, push to the dropship without me and launch. That's an order." He found the stairwell compromised. The door was sealed shut, and the elevator was offline. Dr. Carter caught up. "The stairwell is our only chance," she said, "but the hatch is sealed. We need to override it and get power back to the system. If we can restore power, the hatch should open." Joe nodded, quickly assessing the situation. "All right, let's get to the control panel," he said, leading the way to the nearby maintenance room. "We need to reroute the power manually," Joe instructed. "Find the main circuit and redirect it to the stairwell hatch controls. We don't have much time." Dr. Carter's hands trembled as she worked, but together they managed to reroute the power, shouting out, "Mask up, everyone, containment breach," and then the lights flickered, and with a loud clang, the stairwell hatch began to open. Joe turned to Dr. Carter. "Thanks, but I have it from here. Stay with the others." Carter shook her head, her voice firm. "No, I insist on coming and helping. It's my child." Joe placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "No, I cannot be left in a situation where I need to rescue all 3 of us. This is what I do. Trust me." He gave her a comforting squeeze. "You stay here." Reluctantly, Carter lowered her head and went back to the group. Joe called out, "Lieutenant, as soon as they're all ready to move, take them to the ship, hold for 4 minutes, and launch. That storm will not wait, and neither will you. Understand?" A loud, "Yes, sir," echoed in the small room as Joe rushed up the stairwell. Dr. Carter said, "Hey, you, I need to grab the alien time capsule to take with us. That's Lieutenant Smith to you, ma'am, and I have my orders. We push to the ship in 1 minute," he replied. "This is a discovery of a lifetime," Carter yelled. Lieutenant Smith leaned in. "You have 1 minute, ma'am. Get it, and at that time, we are moving out, even if I have to carry you myself." He turned and shouted to the group, "Moving in 1 minute. Pick up all gear. Huddle up. Men circle up around the civilians and prepare to move." Meanwhile, Joe reached the top of the building, the stairwell hatch only partially opening due to an obstruction. He pivoted his suit and, using its hydraulic arms, pried the door open. In the corner, he spotted Tommy, who was crying and calling out, "Mommy! Mommy! Hurry, Tommy, I can't fit. Put on this biosuit. We're losing O2 fast," Joe urged, pulling out a blue biosuit from his backpack. But Tommy just sat there, crying. Realizing he wasn't getting through to the child, Joe blinked his suit's lights and turned on the loudspeaker and said, "Tommy, this is the Red Power Ranger. I'm here to save the day, but I require your assistance. Together, we'll save your mother, the crew, and maybe, just maybe, humanity itself. Join me." Tommy slowly lifts his head, his eyes perked up. "This is the Blue Power Ranger answering your call, sir," he said, hopping to his feet. "Suit up. Let's move. We have a world to save," Joe replies. Tommy donned the suit. Joe led him out of the building, hoping the 4-minute countdown hadn't run out yet. Joe reached the bottom of the stairs. To his shock, his team was still there, and Lieutenant Smith was yelling at Dr. Carter. "Leave it!" Tommy ran over to his mom. "Move it! We need to move! Ma'am, I'm here to save the day, and you're holding things up." Dr. Carter, overjoyed to see her son safe, hugged him tightly. "Joe, we must have the artifact," she yelled back, as her son escorted her to the balled-up group. Joe assessed the situation quickly. "All right, 4 men over here. Carry this artifact," he ordered. "That storm's about to hit, and we might not make it off this rock ourselves if we don't move, and I mean now." The team sprang into action, securing the artifact and preparing to move out. With Tommy safe and Dr. Carter's precious discovery in tow, they sprinted towards the dropship. As the howling winds of the approaching storm grew louder, the team formed a protective circle around the survivors, moving swiftly back towards the dropship. The storm clouds were rolling in, a wall of dust and ice churning ominously. Time was running out. 2 minutes to storm impact. The pilot's voice boomed over the comms. They reached the dropship, the ramp already lowered. "Get them inside," Joe barked. As the last survivor was hauled aboard, Joe covered the rear. He sprinted up the ramp. Rocker shouted, "Everyone, sit and buckle up." As the team scrambled to their seats, Dr. Carter slipped into the seat next to Joe. "Sir, I fear we are in far more danger than you suspect. Let me explain," she said, her voice filled with dread. "We discovered what seemed to be a time capsule buried in the ice as we were terraforming," she began. "It contained a message, and after deciphering it, we learned it was from an ancient race that once called Mars home. According to the message, there was a brutal war that ravaged the planet. Both sides used nuclear missiles, devastating the land. In a desperate attempt to turn the tide, one side developed a parasite that thrived on oxygen and consumed everything, leaving a reddish residue behind. As they faced defeat in a desperate bid to turn the tide of war, they released the parasite, dooming their planet to a death-spiraling fate." Dr. Carter paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "The time capsule was left as a warning to anyone who might find it. Unbeknownst to us, we released the parasite when we began terraforming. The increased levels of oxygen we're dumping into the atmosphere have made the facility and its buildings an ideal breeding ground for these creatures." As the dropship's engines roared to life, a jarring sound reverberated through the hull. Joe Rocker looked out the viewport to see the ship's landing legs buckling and bending at unnatural angles. Panic surged through the cabin. "The ship's legs are bending, sir," a crew member shouted. Dr. Carter's voice cut through the chaos. "It's the parasites, Mr. Rocker. They're eating away at your ship. If we don't get to space now, we'll be grounded for good." Joe slammed his fist on the intercom. "Pilot, full throttle. Get us off this rock, now." The dropship shuddered as the engine strained against the weight. With a final, desperate roar, the ship lifted off, leaving the storm behind. Joe watched as the red, parasite-infested ground fell away beneath them, praying they could reach the safety of space before the dropship's structural integrity gave out entirely. Joe Rocker stood tall. "Everyone, activate full decontamination procedures," he commanded. "We can't risk bringing those parasites back to Earth. Inform Mission Control. We have the survivors and are on our way home." With decontamination protocols completed, Joe ordered everyone into cryo sleep for the journey home. As they awakened from cryo-sleep, Joe instructed the AI to initiate drop and recovery protocols. Suddenly, alarms on the console began flashing, displaying biohazard emblems. "We missed something," he muttered. The crew quickly dispersed, searching the ship for any sign of contamination. Dr. Carter said, "It's paramount that the parasite does not make it to Earth. It will spell the end of humanity." Joe's expression hardened. "It destroyed one world. It will not sink its fangs into another if I have my say." Determined, he led the charge to locate the threat before it was too late. "Quick, sweep the ship. Check everywhere," Joe commanded. Tommy spoke up. "Sir, my Blue Ranger suit has holes in it now. I can't put it back on. There's not enough of it left." Joe's eyes widened. "To the airlock. Check the suit lockers," he shouted. The team hurried to the airlock, but when they arrived, the hatch refused to open. Joe punched in the code again, but still nothing happened. The AI's voice echoed through the ship. "Safety protocols preventing hatch release. Environment compromised. Hull breach, resulting in a loss of cabin pressure." Joe peered through a small viewport and saw the suit lockers almost completely gone, scattered against the bulkhead next to the airlock to space. A gaping hole revealed the distant view of Earth. His heart sank with the realization. "This must stop here," he said. "We cannot land." Determined, Joe turned to his crew. "We need to find another solution. We can't let this parasite reach Earth. We must stop it here, whatever it takes." Dr. Carter examined the damage and said, "They were exposed to space. The lack of O2 would have killed them all. We should be safe. That's why there's only a hole in the wall instead of the whole room being gone." Suddenly, Tommy spoke up. "Sir, my suit." As reddish dust began to fill the cabin, Joe immediately reacted. "Mask up. Vent the ship." The crew quickly donned their masks and moved to the forward section. "Seal it. Vent," Joe ordered. They sealed the section and vented it before moving back to the previous area to repeat the process. Dr. Carter looked at Joe, concerned. "Sir, we're wasting our time. It's too small to see if we got it all. This is futile. I fear we might need to go down with the ship." Joe dropped his head, realizing she was right. "Find a comm system. Send messages home. Say your goodbyes. We're veering toward the sun and saying our farewells," he instructed. He noticed Tommy sitting in the corner, his head lowered, tears streaming down his face. Joe stood up and called out, "Lieutenant Smith, the escape pods on the bridge, how many do they hold?" Smith replied, "Sir, the escape pods would have been compromised when we vented." "Not the bridge pods," Joe clarified. "For the captain and pilot, they were sealed off and should be safe. Go check." Smith quickly checked and reported back. "They're fine. The AI says no biohazards. It's safe to launch. We have 2 pods, sir, for 2 people." The crew was ecstatic, but Joe quickly hushed them. "If they're used, it will be by the boy, Tommy." The crew agreed, but Smith spoke up. "Sir, you can't leave that boy without a mother." Smith nodded and gathered Tommy and the artifact. "Come on, Tommy. We're going to make sure your story is told," he said gently. Tommy, still sniffling, followed Smith. Joe watched as they prepared to leave, feeling a heavy burden lift slightly. They were making a sacrifice, but it was for the greater good. "Good luck and Godspeed," he whispered as he watched Tommy and his mother leave the room. Joe says, "Inform Mission Control of our situation and the contents of the escape pods." "Mission Control, we have escape pods ready for launch," the communications officer relayed. Mission Control's response was immediate. "Negative on the drop request. That's a negative. No go on escape pod release." Joe frowned. "We have a green light up here, Command." "Not from ground control," Mission Control replied firmly. "Contamination risk is too high. No one is to return." Lieutenant Smith lowered his head as he left the bridge, tapping the launch button and mumbling to himself. "It does a 30-second countdown, more than enough time to push and get into the pod. But I was ordered not to drop the pods, and I'm a good soldier who follows orders. So because I'm such a good soldier, I'm now going to report to Joe. Don't push this button while I'm gone," he said, leaving the room. Dr. Carter hurried over to Tommy. "Hurry, Tommy, get into the pod containing the artifact. I'll meet you on the ground," she said, kissing him on the forehead. "I love you, Mom," Tommy cried out as the hatch closed. Dr. Carter rushed to the button and slammed her hand down on it. A 30-second countdown started. She quickly entered her own pod. As the AI announced the launch of the 2 pods, Joe saw Smith enter the room. "Lieutenant, what have you done?" Joe asked. Smith replied, "Just what we all already agreed on." He stood at attention. The countdown ticked away, and Joe watched as the pods launched. The escape pods detached from the ship with a jolt. As the clamps released, the pods' thrusters ignited, their trajectories curving towards Earth. The AI announced their descent, guiding them through the darkness as they began their journey home. Then, abruptly, the AI announces biohazard detection. Warning lights flickered to life on the display console. Joe watched from the viewport. The vast emptiness of space seemed even more unforgiving in that moment. "You know it won't be that easy, right, Smith?" he murmured. Smith, standing beside him, replied, "Nothing ever is," he said quietly. Together, they watched as glowing bursts of light erupted from the surface of Earth, missile launches streaking skyward like vengeful arrows. The sight was mesmerizing. In a heart-stopping moment, a barrage of missiles converged on one of the escape pods, vaporizing it with multiple devastating hits. The flash of destruction was blinding as the debris scattered, creating a spectacular display of pyrotechnics. The resulting explosion formed a swirling cloud of dust and debris, hanging ominously in the void. For a brief second, silence reigned. Then, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, a missile burst through the cloud. Joe's heart sank as he tracked its deadly path. He took a deep breath. "It was nice working with you boys," he said, looking around the bridge one last time, taking in the faces of his crew. The missile struck with devastating precision. The ship was obliterated in a blinding explosion, a fiery testament to their sacrifice. Joe's final thoughts were of Earth and the hope that their actions might have bought it a chance for survival. From the deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, a streak of burning amber shot through the sky, its fiery trail cutting across the heavens before extinguishing with a dramatic splashdown. The commanding officer, Captain Jonathan Hayes, his binoculars trained on the impact site, "Recover that pod," he ordered. Navy personnel moved with practiced precision. "Prepare to hoist the pod on deck," the captain commanded. The deck crew scrambled into action, securing the necessary equipment. Men in biohazard suits approached the pod as it was lifted from the water. They used a variety of scanning equipment, sweeping the pod for any signs of life or hazardous materials. "Do we have any communications?" one of the officers asked. "Negative," came the response. "No life signs, no power. The pod appears dormant." Captain Hayes frowned. "Assemble a containment crate on deck," he ordered. The crew quickly constructed a large metal crate designed to safely transport potentially dangerous materials. The biohazard team carefully secured the pod, preparing to hoist it into the air. As the crane lifted the pod, the bottom suddenly dissolved into a fine reddish dust, spilling onto the deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford. The crew stepped back in shock as the dust spread, covering the deck in a thin layer of crimson. Amidst the settling dust, a large artifact fell through, landing with a heavy thud. It sat facing the captain. The artifact was intricately designed, clearly of alien origin, its surface covered in strange symbols and patterns. Captain Hayes's eyes widened. "Quarantine this area immediately," he barked. "Seal it all up now." The crew moved swiftly, erecting barriers and sealing off the section of the deck where the dust had spread. "Ensure no one enters this area without full biohazard gear," Hayes added. "We need to contain this before it spreads." As the red cloud of dust was carried away by the ocean breeze, the captain watched with a sinking feeling. "Inform command of our situation," Hayes ordered. "They need to know exactly what we're dealing with." The radio operator nodded and began transmitting the urgent message. Meanwhile, the containment team worked tirelessly to secure the artifact, hoping their efforts would be enough to protect the ship and its crew from whatever threat had just landed on their deck. Captain Jonathan Hayes stood in the ship's communication room, his expression grim as he relayed the situation to command. "This is Captain Hayes of the USS Gerald R. Ford. We have recovered the escape pod, but I fear it might be too late." Upon lifting it to the deck, the pod's bottom dissolved into a reddish dust. contaminating the area. We've secured the deck and established a quarantine zone, but the artifact within the pod is unlike anything we've ever encountered. The dust dispersed quickly, carried by the ocean breeze, and I cannot guarantee it hasn't spread beyond the containment zone. He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. Command, I believe we must assume a containment breach. This alien substance is highly unpredictable, and its potential for harm is unknown. Immediate directives are needed to mitigate any further risk to the crew and the surrounding environment. We require specialized containment units and scientific teams to analyze and control the situation. I repeat, we must treat this as a critical threat until we understand the full extent of what we've brought aboard. Please advise on the next steps. Seconds turned into minutes with no response. A thick tension filled the air. Send the message again, Captain Hayes commanded, knowing the fate of his crew and possibly the world hung in the balance. This is not goodbye, nor the end. Until the story continues, my friends. B.N.Rocker.